Hello, everyone. Welcome back for some more of our reading of Fate, Strange Fake, Volume 1. We are through the first prologue, the one with Archer. We've learned that Gilgamesh has a new master who seems really interesting. I'm excited to learn about her, but the one that I'm actually really excited to learn about is this Berserker, who I know literally nothing about. Because if I recall from the beginning part where it was describing each of them, didn't it just say it was like a black mass? Like, what could it be? Well, I guess we're going to have to see. So, let's dig on into a nice book. All right, here we go. Prologue 2, Berserker. So, oh. Prologue 2, Berserker, England. Somewhere in London. The Clock Tower. For most, that term refers to a popular tourist destination in London. For Magi, however, it means something else altogether. It is the headquarters of the association, which brings countless many Magi together, and at the same time, it is the finest educational institute for the training of young Magi. It could well be said to be the Vatican of magic. For as long as England has existed, it has produced first-class mage after first-class mage, each of whom has gone on to elevate the art of magic to a new level. Frick. I don't like to use the hard words on this channel myself. Just a personal thing. A word unbecoming of that austere institution resounded through the halls, which still, that still works. You know what you are? In a word, you're an imbecile. I think I know exactly who this is, said a man in his early 30s, remonstrating the youngster facing him. Yep. His long hair fluttered in the breeze as he swore. He wore a red coat with golden ornaments on its shoulders. Hold up. That's like his FGO outfit. Huh. And his face bore a tremendously sour expression. But that youngster desperately replied, "Oh, come on, at least describe me with 3 words," with a response that was just a bit off. "You're a cretin and an imbecile. There are no other words to describe you." The youngster stood his ground, unintimidated by the stern man. "But I really want to participate, Professor. I've got to go to the States for the Holy Grail War." "Oh, for F's sake." Oh. I mean, it does, okay, but it does, I do feel like Waver would say these things. "Don't bloody," oh wow, we're making him British. "Don't bloody go around yelling about that in the hallways. You incorrigible imbecile, damn it all. Where did you hear of it? It's not a top secret matter, but it certainly isn't something a rotten little whippersnapper, oh my god, whippersnapper, ought to know about." The professor gave the clinging youngster a piece of his mind, having checked to make sure that nobody was in the vicinity. He was an instructor at the association, the finest educational institute in the magical world, and was known to all as Lord El Malloy II. Apparently, that wasn't his real name, but everyone who knew him referred to him as Lord El Malloy II out of respect. Though he was still young, he was said to be the finest lecturer in the Clock Tower. Every student who had taken a course taught by him had gone on to become a first-rate mage. His students became famous among Magi the world around for their exploits. As such, he earned the respect of many Magi, who bestowed upon him various nicknames, such as Professor Charisma, Master V, and the Great Big Ben 9 London Star. It's a bit of a strange one. He had no great exploits to his name, however. That is just not public knowledge, I think, and did seem a bit irritated that his students were stealing the spotlight. But for now, what was irritating him was specifically the young man standing before him, who was one of his students. In response to his professor's question about the Holy Grail War, the youngster nonchalantly replied, "Yesterday, some professors and administrators from the association were holding a council meeting in one of the basement lecture halls, right? You know that famous puppet master, Mr. Rongal? This is the first time I actually saw him in the flesh." Upon hearing his student's reply, El Malloy's expression turned indistinct, perhaps with infuriation. He applied a claw hold to his student's face and hissed, "Why the frick Do you know what happened in that meeting? Okay, I can perfectly imagine this, though. I was a bit curious, so I eavesdropped. That was a top-secret meeting, you twit! They must have set up dozens of bounded fields. He averted his eyes. Well, see, I know I shouldn't have, but I was really curious. Oh my god, dude. I was really, really curious. So he replied apologetically. So I figured, why not try hacking into the room's own bounded field? And what do you know? It worked. Silence. The use of the word hacking among magi was not a peculiarity of his. Its use was in fact rather prevalent among younger magi. His actions likely had nothing to do with hacking or cracking. He meant that he had bypassed the bounded field unnoticed, snuck into the meeting, and eavesdropped. Flat Escardos. He was the most senior of Lord Elmloy II's students, which I've been told by people this is actually his debut, and him appearing in case files is later on like a callback to this. This is his debut, so interesting for sure. I don't know. I'm very curious about how this is gonna all because we know some of his powers from watching case files, right? So we're gonna get a servant that works with that? I wonder. Flat Escardos, he was the most senior of Lord Elmloy II's students. Though he entered Elmloy's tutelage as a young man, he subsequently spent many years in the clock tower, unable to graduate. Oh, dang. To describe him in a single word, only Elmloy's terms of abuse would be really appropriate. Using a few more words, however, it would be fair to describe him as a man with boundless magical potential and talent. A man who, however, critically lacks the ability to put that talent to any good use. He was the eldest son of the Escardos family, a family that lived on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. So, it was hoped that Flat would be a mage who had magic circuits the likes of which are rarely seen, along with the talent necessary to control them. But, alas, his magical talent was for naught, since he lacked the stern disposition that is necessary for all magi. At first, he was hailed as a prodigy, and studied under a fair number of professors. Eventually, though, all of them started bellyaching about Flat, and so in the end, he was assigned to Lord Elmloy II, where there was nobody else available. Years passed. As Flat's magical talents developed, he came to surpass all the other students. Other students were unable to achieve the same results with their students. This was a good sign for Master V's reputation. Okay, hold up. Oh, I was gonna say, where does the V come from? And then I remembered, oh right, Velvet. That said, Flat had too many other problems, and so he was still yet to graduate from the clock tower. Usually, Lord Elmloy II would refuse to overlook a student's weak points, unwilling to send an underprepared mage out into the world. But this time, and only this time, he'd begun to regret having made that choice. A talented idiot is the most dangerous kind of idiot, said Master V calmly. We really going with Master V, huh? Master V had moved past anger. He had achieved a sort of ascetic enlightenment. That said, he looked as sullen as ever. He whacked his student and said, I'll pretend I never heard any of this. Now quit harassing me about this. Yep, that's him. And yeah, that's Flat. Oh, all my man smoking. Okay, he looks slightly different than what we've seen in case files. Flat there. Something about him. I can't necessarily put it into words. He looks more normal and less gremlin. Slightly. I won't be a bother, Professor. I just, I need some kind of item to summon a hero, right? I don't know how I'm supposed to find one of those. Like, if I had a portrait of Napoleon, could I summon Napoleon? An emperor would be the coolest thing. If I were the heroic spirit Napoleon, I'd rather have you face the firing squad than make a contract with you. Elmloy thought about making a break for it, but decided against it. Instead, perhaps because of something about the Holy Grail War had come to mind, he asked Flat a serious question. Flat, why do you want the Holy Grail? I can't imagine that you take magic so seriously that you'd want to reach the root. Knowing you, I have to ask. You aren't planning on wishing to graduate or wishing to peeve me off as comeuppance for not letting you graduate or anything that's stupid, right? Emmeloy was completely unprepared for Flat's response. Because I want to see it. What? I mean, it'd be so cool. It's the Holy Grail. Hitler and Goebbels wanted it for the Third Reich. And Shi Huangdi and Nobunaga and Godzilla all look... Okay, hold up. Godzilla all looked for it too. Okay. If it really exists, I've got to see what it looks like. His name is Gobel, not Gobbles. Godzilla never looked for it. I don't know about Nobunaga or Shi Huangdi, but historically and culturally speaking, that doesn't seem right. Shi Huangdi. Who's that? Shi Huangdi. Is that... Oh, that is Qin Shi Huang. Okay, I was going to say. I was like, that name sounds familiar. I think that was brought up as a name for King Shi Huang, so yes. Okay. I'm also going to type in Godzilla Holy Grail. The Holy Grail Godzilla. No, there's nothing here. Apparently there is a Project Godzilla fandom for Godzilla in the search for the Holy Grail, but no, he has not searched for the Holy Grail. As for Nobunaga, I'm gonna wait on that. Fate Redline read through one day. Elmaloy corrected Flat on the points that didn't matter, but stayed otherwise silent. Flat waited a while for his professor to respond, expecting to be thoroughly scolded. Eventually, Elmaloy sighed and calmly and kindly said, "Do you understand what a war of mage against mage really entails? You might as well experience things worse than death and end up being killed gruesomely, not having accomplished anything. And people who know that still look for the Grail, right? Now I want to see it even more." Elmaloy was about to yell at him, telling him to think about it more. But even if he did think about it more, this moron would probably end up saying the same thing. Having arrived at this conclusion, he decided to question Flat from a different angle. "Well, tell me this. Do you have what it takes to kill somebody for the Grail?" What if I could win without killing people? Like, we could play chess or... Okay, this is hilarious considering he's gonna get Berserker. Like, okay, that's not gonna work out, buddy. Brilliant! If your opponent happens to be the world chess champion, or that might just work. Heck, maybe you could even have a chess boxing match. This is a tricky problem, huh? I really, really want to see other heroes. If it works out, I want to make friends with them. If I made friends with 6 heroes, I'd be an awesome mage. We could even conquer the world. Elmaloy remained silent. He had figured that Flat had completely lost track of his initial questions somewhere along the way. He wasn't planning to admonish Flat, nor was he particularly surprised by Flat's ramblings. He put his hand to his chin, and it seemed to be thinking about something for a while. And eventually he snapped back to reality and said, "That's not happening." He flatly put a stop to Flat's fantasies. Yeah, well, I'm counting on you, Professor. Or should I say, Great Big Ben 9 London Star? Don't call me that to my face. And honestly, why did you pick that nickname? You're making fun of me, aren't you? You're making fun of me, you clod. Well, don't worry. I'll think up a new nickname for you. It'll be perfect. Like, how about, Magical Miniskirt Professor? Frick off and die. Wow, he sure loves his F word. Again, that's just a personal thing. Also for YouTube monetization. In the end, Flat clearly looked miserable after having been dealt with so coldly by Elmaloy. He wandered around the academic wing of the clock tower. He walked down a long corridor, humping in a manner unbefitting a man nearly 20 years of age. Oh, he is, he's actually like one of the older students. Wow, okay. And then, good to see you there. A woman called out to him from down the hall. She was one of the administrative personnel of the clock tower. In her hand, she held a large box and a small bundle. These packages are for your professor. Could you pass them on to him? Oh my god, hold up, wait, are we literally doing Fate Zero again where he steals it? And so she thrust the 2 packages into Flat's hands. Now, he would have to hand these over to Master V, but, oh man, I bet he's still mad. Flat thought negative thoughts as he headed back up the hallway, where upon he was overcome by curiosity about the contents of the box. He used clairvoyance magic to examine its contents. He saw a small knife with a sinister-looking design on it, probably designed for ceremonial use. And then, with his keen power of clairvoyance, he saw a name inscribed on the blade. An electric sensation shot through his body. Could it be? Could it be who? Professor? Oh no. You got it for me? Taken in by his own misinterpretation, he set off in a run, carrying the box with him. There were a number of symbols on the inside of the box, but they weren't written in any script he could read. Presumably, they were magical instructions from some other country or some such. He could figure it out how to interpret those instructions at some other time. For now, he had one goal: to get to the center of the academic wing as quickly as possible. Son of a frick. He's back again. Lord Elmaloy II was clearly not pleased when he saw a certain someone sprinting down the hallway towards him. Strangely, though, when Flat caught up to him with a small package in his hand, he started babbling about things that had nothing to do with the Holy Grail War. Professor, you got this thing for me, gasped Flat as he showed the parcel to the professor. Having run 100 meters at breakneck pace, Flat had run out of breath quite quickly. Elmaloy looked at the parcel, unsure at first what it actually was. When he saw the address and logo printed on the exterior, he quickly realized what it was and nodded. So you... What, do you want this? Flat nodded his head furiously like he was some kind of headbanger. Well, alright. If you want it, you can have it. I didn't need it anyway. Hearing his professor's response, Flat glowed with happiness, the greatest joy of his life thus far. Thank you so much. I really thank you so very much. I'm so glad I'm your student, Prof. He dashed off, almost tearful with joy. Damn, when I was his age, I was everything he isn't. I bet he used clairvoyance to look inside it. What was in there he wanted so much? Elmaloy muttered under his breath, exasperated. A few moments later, Elmaloy II had returned to his room. As he thought about his incompetent pupil, a cabinet caught his eye. It was a double lock, with both a physical component and a magical one. Elmaloy carefully undid the locks and picked up the object inside the cabinet. It was a peculiar-looking protective case in which rested a piece of cloth. From the looks of it, it was an antique. It was decaying and had no apparent use. However, given that it was the most carefully secured object in the room, it was evident that it was no mere raggedy piece of fabric. Take the other servants as your subjects and conquer the world, huh? Thinking back on Flat's ramblings, he frowned and scowled. If I couldn't stop him, I was considering letting him have this, but I'm glad it didn't come to that. Still frowning, Elmaloy II sighed in relief and put the lid back on the case. He thought about the parcel he had let Flat have. I suppose I'm in no position to talk, but they really should rethink the system of having students courier other people's mail. Not that it was a particularly important piece of mail. Well, anyway, if that'll get him to forget about the Holy Grail War, that's a good thing. A few moments earlier, Elmaloy had been enjoying some Japanese video games in the privacy of his room. Base department. Hello. Every time he finished playing a game, he filled out the survey card that had been included in the game box and jotted down his impressions of the game. My dude is so cool. It was just the proper thing to do. Holy crap. Of course, he had to pay international postage to have the cards airmailed back to Japan, but he did so nonetheless. Thanks to that, he had been entered into a number of sweepstakes, and so his room was filled with all sorts of game merchandise. God, I love Waver. That's not to say he filled out the surveys just to get merchandise. To the contrary, he had little interest in most of the products he had received. He really just did want to relay his opinions back to the game designers. And then a few moments after that, if there was any merchandise Elmaloy really did want, he would just order it directly. When he saw the sender's name, that of a Japanese company, on the package Flat had brought to him, he figured it was just another piece of bonus merchandise, and so he didn't even bother to open it to letting Flat have it. Oh my god. Just as Elmaloy suspected, it was nothing more than a piece of game merchandise. Judging from the company's name, he figured it was an action figure from some sort of game about robots or something of the ilk. But in actuality, it was a simulation game called Night Wars of the British Empire. As for what that piece of merchandise was... Okay. A few days later, the city of Snowfield, Center Park. The sun shone brightly, hanging in the midday sky. Flat had hopped on an airplane to America post-haste. Of course, he was thoroughly unprepared for the journey. He had a vague idea of how the Holy Grail War worked, but he was clueless about the specifics. Flat, a man who had more important things to worry about than the Holy Grail War, and a man who gazed at the sigils on his right hand with glee. These are so awesome! If I use these command spell thingums, will they disappear? He rubbed his hand over and over again. Every so often he would mumble something, and then his shoulders would droop. It was as though he was heartbroken. It's like they're gonna vanish. I got it. I absolutely won't use my command seals no matter what. Apparently, Flat had somehow figured out that the command seals disappear after being used. If anybody else with knowledge of the Holy Grail War had been in the park at the time, they would surely have apprehended Flat then and there and taken him in for interrogation. Luckily for him, the only people in the park were ordinary people, mostly children with parents. Flat stared at his command spells for a while longer. Eventually, he opened the cloth parcel he had been holding. From it, he removed a knife. It was a dastardly-looking knife, tinged in red and black, and was, all in all, rather crass. Even though it was still sheathed, its blade was, nonetheless, bizarrely lustrous. Elegantly so, even. Okay, can I just say, what type of game company sends out a promotional knife? That seems like a problem. That seems like a big problem, which makes me think that this might not actually be a promotional game item. Interesting. Man, oh man, thank goodness for Master V. I mean, sure he was beating around the bush, but he had this awesome relic already and waiting for me. Flat still hadn't realized that a mix-up had happened. Looking at the knife with his hands did not dissuade him. Rather, it left him more confident than ever in the verity of the knife, and it spurred him onwards, bringing him all the way to the States. And imagine! The Holy Grail had selected him to participate in the war, and had endowed him with command seals for that purpose. He stared alternatively at his command seals and his knife. Every so often, he mumbled something. Perhaps some 30 minutes had passed when a shocking scene unfolded in the park. And had any other masters known about it, they would have surely fainted from the shock. To be frank, it was miraculous. If his teacher, Elmoli II, had been there to witness it, he would likely have praised Flat. Of course, he would have been furious while doing so, and he would need Flat in the unmentionable, and he would have need Flat in the unmentionables a few times first. God, he is an abusive teacher. Was it a miracle? Or was it a mere stroke of luck? Or perhaps something achieved by Flat's own latent talents? Either way, in a sense, Flat had delivered a powerful slight against the false Holy Grail War. Of course, the only one who was aware of this was Flat himself. I ask of thee, art thou the master who hath summoned me? Okay. What? Upon hearing that frighteningly crisp voice, Flat leapt out of his seat and looked around for the speaker. As before, though, all he could see were families and couples walking about. Whoever it was that had spoken was nowhere to be seen. I say ye? Oh my god, wait, what? I shall take that as an affirmative. Our contract is complete. As partners in the search for the Holy Grail, let us be jolly chums. What frickin' accent is this? Huh? Huh? Flat furiously gyrated his neck in all directions, but still could not find anybody who seemed like the one who had been speaking. Perhaps, witnessing the young man in a panic, the voice continued on. By the stars! You have summoned me before the eyes of the public and without an altar at that. Quite some pluck you have there, O master of mine. Hold it right there. If you did not use an altar, did you neither speak the summoning incantation? Sorry. There was a lot of magical energy flying around. I was kind of fiddling with it, and I guess we linked up. Man, I'm really sorry about summoning you this way. I see. That is quite all right. In fact, it speaks volumes about your excellence as a mage. Apparently, the voice of that servantish being was being transmitted right into Flat's head. He soon realized that magical energy was flowing through his command spells and going somewhere. Rather shyly, he started talking to the voice in his head. I guess this is really the right time to ask, but, are servants always like this? Not at all, lad. I'm a special case. Don't let it bother you. The servant's voice was friendlier than Flat had imagined, and it was quite refined and polite to boot. Oddly enough, he was unable to get any idea as to what specifically the servant identity might be. In any case, I do not really have a definitive or a definite identity, so to speak. You could say that my appearance and manner are of all varieties, but then again, perhaps you could not. It is that sort of thing. What the frick? What is this? Upon hearing any ordinary voice, one can typically tell if the speaker is a man or a woman, or if the speaker is old or young, or maybe even what the speaker's occupation is. Something about the voice is bound to give away those details. But this voice, okay, interesting, so no accent from what I'm reading, which transmitted directly into Flat's head, was devoid of any special characteristics. It was like speaking to a headless monster. So, could you tell me what your name is? A casual question. If the knife in his hand was what it seemed to be, the servant would surely just be what he expected. And yet, Flat was unable to reconcile his impression of a heroic spirit with the voice inside his head. Well, that made sense, since he knew his image of a heroic spirit did not accurately accord with classes of beings called heroes. But, well, in any country where British films and novels were popular, they couldn't have heard of that servant. Granted, in terms of notoriety, he wasn't quite on par with Sherlock Holmes or Arsène Lupin, but unlike those two, he had really existed. Okay, well, we'll see about that. Once upon a time. But for some reason, the servant remained silent. Flat looked around nervously, but suddenly, a man of large build, dressed in shades of black, entered his field of view. Oh boy, you finally manifested. What? What in tarnation are you talking about, boy? The man in black looked at Flat suspiciously. Flat yelped, his face turned a ghastly shade of white. Of course the man would be wearing black. He was a policeman, with a handgun holstered at his hip. He peered down at Flat, a man sitting on a bench in front of the fountain in the middle of the day with a knife in his hand. What in the blazes are you doing yammering to yourself, son? And what's the knife there for? You're acting mighty suspicious. Oh, no, I mean, this isn't... Flat was rattled. He tried to explain what he was doing when... Well, did that surprise you? Suddenly, the police officer began to act in a kind manner. He handed his truncheon to Flat. Just don't mind me here. Google truncheon. Oh, that's the stick that they beat people with. I got it. It felt like a real truncheon, but the moment he grasped it, it vanished into thin air. Surprised, he looked up from his hand, only to find a conspicuous lack of a police officer. In the officer's stead, he saw a woman dressed in a positively... Oh, how the frick do you say this word? I never learned how to say this word. Say it for me. Lascivious. Lascivious. Positively lascivious dress. Like, I read it, but I don't actually say it. And then the woman spoke to him. I thought I might demonstrate my specialty before introducing myself. The voice, though certainly feminine, had the same feel to it as the voice that had been in his head just a while prior. Huh? Huh, what? Flat grew more and more surprised. Then the woman disappeared before his very eyes and... I apologize for startling you, master. I thought this way might be faster. What is this? Servant! The voice was in his head again. Some of the nearby families seemed to notice that something was off. Some rubbed at their eyes while others cocked their heads, and a few children even asked their parents why the police officer turned into a woman and then vanished. Of course, their questions were met with laughter. Given what they had seen, and given that the imprint left on the ground by the woman's high heels remained, there could be certain that what they saw was no hallucination. The truth was not for the ordinary people who looked on with suspicion. Only within Flat's mind would it be revealed. Allow me to introduce myself again. My true name is... Flat waited for him to continue with bated breath. He knew what his servant's true form was. However, the legend in which he appeared, the servant's true name was far more important. Flat waited and waited for the voice to continue echoing in his head, but when the servant finally did continue, what he said surprised Flat in an altogether different way. To be honest, I don't know. Are you serious? Flat had risen halfway off the bench he was sitting on. Realizing that there was nobody in front of him, that he looked rather silly, he embarrassedly sat down while furtively glancing around. Paying no attention to the young man's antics, the servant continued to speak with a voice devoid of any peculiar characteristics. None ought to know my true name, save perhaps for myself, the true me, not the me of legend, or perhaps the one who put a stop to my murders. Is this another take on Jack the Ripper? I mean... We'll have to see. The knife Flat held was not a true relic, but rather an imitation. But where that heroic spirit was concerned, it could draw forth a much more powerful spirit, precisely because it, like the heroic spirit, was an imitation designed for public consumption. Oh, huh? The servant had no name, though there was proof that he once lived in this world, and yet none knew what he truly looked like, nor his appearance, his true name, whether he was a man or a woman, or whether he was even a human at all. Oh my god, is this going to be the Zodiac Killer? That'd be freaking wild. He, though his gender was not known, was a symbol of fear, one who terrified the world. The people imagined him in countless ways, and he was the topic of myriad tales and theories. Perhaps he was a doctor, perhaps he was a teacher, perhaps an aristocrat, perhaps a prostitute, perhaps a butcher, perhaps a devil, perhaps a fairy, perhaps a conspiracy, perhaps madness. It was not even certain whether he was a single person or not. The people's fear of him was exploited to create all manner of stories about him, and they were unified into a single legend. But he was not merely a legend. He had really existed. Indeed, for Flat, who had spent many years at the clock tower, his legend was probably the one closest to home. Everyone knew what proof there was that he existed. In the district of London known as Whitechapel, there were found the macabre corpses of 5 prostitutes. There could be no greater proof. That said, there's a name by which I am known, by which I identified myself in my letters. Jack the Ripper. Oh my god, huh. A few months earlier, Al Malloy had played the game Night Wars of the British Empire. Okay, so Berserker Jack the Ripper is not a little girl? Well, dang, that's pretty good. I'll take that. Cause isn't little girl assassin Jack the Ripper more specifically the the dead children of prostitutes, the souls? Isn't it, right? There's a thing with that. He mail-ordered the game from Japan, thinking it would be a war game about the various knights of England. Alas, the Japanese do not distinguish between the homophones knight and knight in writing. Hold the fucking phone. Fate stay knight. Because a knight stays. Oh my god. Oh my god, did this game reveal the pun that has been completely missed by me all this time? I can't believe this. I can't believe this. Wow, okay. And in this case, they meant the latter. The game's protagonist was based on a real person who wandered the streets of London at night while fighting against the maddening personality within him. At times, he would also end up fighting demons. It was one of those adventure games. Even though it wasn't what he was expecting, Malloy played the game till he cleared it, and jotted down a list of his honest opinions about the game. First on the list was his opinion that the game's title leaves something to be desired. Yeah, Night Wars of the British Empire, that's an awful title. When he turned the survey card over, he noticed that there was some information about the prizes that could be won in the sweepstakes. If you sent in the card, you could be one of 100 lucky winners to receive a replica of a knife with Jack the Ripper's signature on it, sheath included. Like hell Jack the Ripper would inscribe his name on a knife. He snorted at the thought. He lost interest in the prize itself and returned to impassively writing down his thoughts about the game. And all the while, he was utterly unaware of what this survey card would end up bringing about. And then, a few moments after that, Flat sat in front of the fountain in the park, having a mental conversation with the being in his head. This isn't going to go well. This isn't going to go well for him at all. In short, he seemed to have gotten the hang of the situation while speaking naturally with the being. So, you're saying that because you were a nobody at all, you gained the power to become anybody at all, right? Righto. You got lucky, though. If I manifested as a servant in any other class, I would have possessed your body and gone on our maddening rampage to, well, in any case, let's say that I would be swimming in blood by now. Flat found it difficult to interpret that as a joke. He couldn't help but look around at the face of the people around him. Were Jack to go on a rampage, most magi would worry that ordinary people would come to know of the existence of magic. Flat, however, found himself relieved for some reason, one rather atypical of a mage. By the way, what class are you? Are you an assassin? Ah, my apologies. I'm of the Berserker class. Huh? The servant's answer sent Flat into a tizzy. Flat wasn't a complete ignoramus. He'd done some basic research into the Holy Grail War. He knew that servants of the Berserker class would gain power in exchange for losing their sanity. Perhaps Jack understood why Flat was confused. He began to matter-of-factly explain the nature of his class. You see, I was enshrined in legend as a symbol of madness. The class of the man-in warrior is really the only one that really fits me. Ah, like how a negative times a negative makes a positive. Any ordinary mage, or indeed any ordinary person, would have to wonder if that explanation would fly. Flat, of course, took it in stride. This in turn surprised Jack, who mumbled something about amending his explanation. If I were the soul of an actual person, this probably would not have happened. Since I was just an emblem of badness, however, I suppose I was overlooked. It is quite a miracle then. It is quite the miracle. Then again, perhaps there is something unique about this Holy Grail War itself. Interesting, okay. Wow, servants really are awesome. As usual, a simple response from Flat. Recalling a matter which made him uneasy, the servant started talking about something else. By the way, when I appeared before you in the form of a police officer, why did you not attempt to hypnotize me, or use any other form of magical suggestion? Surely that is the most basic sort of magic. Huh? Well, I figured I should make the cop understand what was going on first. I was worried about your competence for a moment there, lad. Flat, sensing there was a tinge of embarrassment in the voice in his head, changed the topic of conversation. So, if we find the Grail, what will you wish for? As you are my master, I suppose I ought to inform you, but I beg you, please do not laugh at me. The sane Berserker hesitated for a moment before continuing to let his voice echo in Flat's head. I want to know who slew those 5 prostitutes in Whitechapel. In other words, my own identity. That is all. Interesting. Your identity. I am a mere fable with no real presence. And yet, when I think of people inventing stories and hypotheses about my true identity and nature, it frightens me. I do not know that you will understand me, given you have a body and a name and a past to call your own. His voice sounded meek. He just wanted to know who he was. It was an unusual idea, but at the same time, it was likely all that the servant desired. Flat thought for a while. Then, straightforwardly, he asked the servant a question. So, when you find out who you are, what will you do? Like, if someone summons you somewhere besides a Holy Grail War, will you appear in the body of the person you once were? That way it may well happen. Though my current form differs from the person I once was, it remains true I was once a serial killer. The legends about me are all based on that premise. If I am a person of legend, who also existed in fact, the onus is upon me to be as true to my reality as possible. The way he spoke somehow conveyed the impression that he was lonely. Doesn't that mean that reading is hard. Doesn't that just mean there's no real you? Stated Flat, straightforwardly and to the point, with no sense of decorum whatsoever. Flat was just such an outrageously frank person. The servant was taken aback, and the voice resounding in Flat's head reflected on that. Do people ever tell you that you lack decorum? They totally do, all the time, thanks. I was not commending you, but, well, that is fine. We need not discuss this matter any further. Anyway, I am surprised that you saw fit to summon me. You could expect neither the might of the hero nor the morality of man from me. It was an inevitably reasonable thought. Never mind that Jack the Ripper himself was one thing. Anyone would be hesitant to be around him, let alone summon him as a servant on top of that. Flat, frank as frank could be, replied, I love people like you. You know, men of mystery with secret identities and all that. Ellipses. Come on, that's so cool. Besides, you're an awesome guy. Isn't that great? He may have had a mage's intuition, but his temperament was not so mage-like. If there was one way in which his temperament was fitting of a mage, it was that his intuitions differed ever so slightly from those of most ordinary people. To phrase it in the most generous way possible, he was gifted with a superabundance of curiosity, and magi ought to be curious. Though it was unclear how the servant interpreted Flat's reply. He, a servant who should be composed of pure madness and savagery, readied himself for battle. With the slightest bit of optimism in his voice, he spoke. Very well, my master. Where shall we begin? Using my abilities, we can infiltrate any place whatsoever and slay the enemy masters where they stand. I await your orders. What might they be? The servant was clearly in high spirits. His magi, on the other hand, just sat there with a calm smile on his face. Truly, he was the least mage-like of all magi. The weather's nice today. Let's just enjoy the sun for a while. It's nice and warm. What? Thus began the journey of a young man who knew nothing of tragedy, and a villainous spirit who created nothing but tragedy. There was just one thing they shared. None stood further from the ideals of the Grail War than they. That one and nothing else. That one thing and nothing else. Interesting. Interesting. Interesting, interesting, interesting. Okay. Well, thank you all for watching, everyone. I'm going to do more shorter videos, you know, chapter at a time, just to keep things rolling. More content, you know, keep it rolling that way. Don't have to worry about, you know, running out of videos, because I've been super busy. Next time, we will be reading Prologue 3, Assassin. I am enjoying learning about each of them here. Before we go, actually, I'm going to pop a, I was going to say save state, but the word is bookmark instead. So I'm pop a bookmark down there. Let's go back to the beginning. And, yeah, let's, come on, there we go. So it specifically says, I'm gonna read this again here. Summoned using an imitation knife, formed a contract with Flat. He possessed the ability to freely change his form, power that originates from a certain... Okay, so yeah, no, that was just absolutely exactly that. Everything else we've read. Cool. Okay. Interesting. I'm gonna need to go back and actually read, because there is the apparent side chapter of Fate Apocrypha that completely goes into the origin of Jack the Ripper, and like I actually think I did read it, but it's been a while and I don't remember it. And I think that's something that a lot of people who watch my stuff don't understand. Sometimes I read stuff and it doesn't go into my long-term memory. And it's not that I don't want to, it's just that I have there's lots of stuff going in this noggin and it can't all fit there all the time. So I apologize if I forget certain things. That said, right, I'm gonna do a quick secondary wiki dive and, you know, maybe reread that chapter about the origin of Apocrypha's Jack the Ripper to see if I could find what the difference is. Because I'm really curious why this one is so different. Why that one had a body and this one doesn't. But otherwise, thank you all for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time for Prologue 3, Assassin. We will continue with some more Fate Strange Fake. Ciao.